kids. Thanks for joining us again today. All of you should be totally done with school now. Yay! I hope you're enjoying being finished and really getting to enjoy the summer. Well, let's get into our lesson today. I'm going to do things just a little bit different today. I want to start with a little bit of review. Now, we've had some lessons for the last 4 weeks. So let's see if we can remember what we've been talking about. You're going to have to think way back in your head somewhere and see if you can remember. But I'll show you some pictures up on the screen and see if you can remember the people that we talked about, all right? So here's our first picture. Can anybody remember who was our lesson about? Did you say Cain and Abel? If you did, give yourselves a hand. Good job. You got it right. That's right. We talked about how God gave specific instructions on what they were supposed to sacrifice. What did they have to sacrifice? Yes, it was supposed to be an animal where they could actually shed blood. And we know Cain obeyed the instructions God gave. But what did Cain do? Yeah, he didn't obey. He wanted to do things his own way, didn't he? You're right. All right, second week. This was our lesson. Can anybody remember? We talked about a building or a city with some really high, strong walls. Can you remember who the leader was? The person that we talked about? Yes, Joshua. And what was the name of that city? Jericho, that's right. And again, God gave some instructions for Joshua to obey. He told him he was supposed to walk around that city for 6 days, just one time every day for 6 days. And then on the 7th day, he was supposed to walk 6 times around. And if Joshua and Israel obeyed, then the walls would fall down. Did they obey? They sure did, didn't they? All right, so that was our second week. Now, week number 3. This was something of our story. Does that help you remember what our story was about? There was a certain man who was going into battle. Do you remember his name? Gideon. Gideon was the one. And Gideon had this huge army. He had lots and lots of soldiers. And God told him, that's too many. Do you remember how many soldiers did he come up or end up with? Yeah, that's right. 300 soldiers was what he ended up with. Does anybody remember the 3 things that he took to battle with him? It wasn't a sword, wasn't a gun or a cannon or a machine gun or anything like that. You can sort of see them in the pictures. Each one of them were to have a torch or some kind of a lamp. They also had a trumpet or a horn. And then you can see on the floor or on the ground here, there are some pots, and they had clay pots that they were covering their fire with or their lamp with. And those were the 3 things that they used to go into battle with. Again, sounds like kind of a strange way to win a war or win a battle, but that's what God told them to do, and Gideon obeyed. All right, then last week, maybe you'll remember this one. We had a story or a lesson about a man who was supposed to have a sacrifice along with some other prophets. Do you remember? This man's name was Elijah. That's right. And he was up on this mountain with a number of other prophets of Baal, which was a false god or an idol that they were worshiping. And they were supposed to pray to their idol, and fire was supposed to come down and see which was the true God. And remember, the ones from Baal prayed all day long and no fire came. But Elijah came, he got his sacrifice all ready, and then, do you remember what he did with those pots? Yeah, he put water in them and then put that on top of all of the things he had on the sacrifice, And then he prayed to God. And did fire come? It sure did, didn't it? And the Bible tells us that everything was consumed in the fire. The wood, the animal that was on the sacrifice, but also the rocks that were making the altar, everything was gone. It was truly amazing what God had done. Now, for the last 4 weeks, we've talked about 4 different people. We talked about Cain and Abel, we talked about Joshua, we talked about Gideon, and we talked about Elijah. Different people, but they all were given something to do. What was it they were supposed to do? Can anybody remember? Can you think about what were all of them supposed to do? Let's see if we think really hard. Does anything come into mind? Do you see some letters back there? Yeah, what word do they spell? Obey, that's right. All 4 of those people were supposed to obey what God told them to do. And that's what we've been learning about this last few weeks, is about obeying God. All right, it's time for us to sing some songs, and I've picked a new song for today, and it's called Obedience, because our theme for the last few weeks and even today is obey. That's right. And so this song is called Obedience, and I love the words that it has. It talks about obeying is doing exactly what God says. And we've talked about these 4 people, Joshua, Abel, Gideon, and Elijah. All 4 of them had to do exactly what God told them to do. And that's what we need to do as well. Not only that, but this song also talks about obeying and doing it happily and also doing it right away. And those are really important things as well. Sometimes we can obey, but we have to stomp our feet and have a really sad face about it. And sometimes we just don't do it right away. We'll wait for a little while till we want to do it, or maybe a couple days or something like that. But obeying is doing exactly what God says, doing it happily, and doing it right away. So listen to this song the first time, and then we'll try to do it again so that you can try to pick up on the tune a little bit. And then after that, we're going to sing Who's the King of the Jungle and try to get a little bit of our energy out. All right, let's try it one more time. This time, try to sing along with us, all right? Here we go.
The king of the jungle, hoo hoo. Who's the king of the sea? Bow wow wow wow. Who's the king of the universe? And who's the king of me? Bow, wow, wow. Hoo, hoo.
Oh, those cookies smell so good. I know she said I couldn't have any because they were for a party, but still they smell so good. I better not take one. But Mom's not here. She wouldn't know if I just ate one. Yum!
She thought she didn't have to obey just because no one was watching, didn't she?
I'm glad you got to come play ball with me today. This is so much fun. Here, go far. Oh no! The ball hit my mom's favorite flower bush. It looks like it's broken. What should we do? I think we should just pretend that we don't know anything about it. My mom's not here anyway. She'll never know.
Dan thought he could lie to his mom and she would never know. Did they really have to obey? I mean, no one was watching. No one would know. But we know God sees everything. How many of you obey when you have to? When you know someone is watching, many times we obey because we fear getting caught and being punished.
All right, today our lesson is about 4 boys who are going to obey God. Now, these 4 boys were far away from home, and they had no parents there to make sure that they were obeyed. But they decided, we will obey God. Now, the names of these 4 boys are, and let me get my picture up here, we have Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now you might say, Miss Michelle, I don't think I've ever heard of the names of those 4 boys. Are you sure they're in the Bible? And yes, they really are in the Bible, but you probably know them by their other names. You know them Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and then Daniel. Have you ever heard of them? Yeah, I thought you had. Well, in our lesson today, these 4 boys have a problem, a very big problem. You see, they've come together and they said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? The man that's in charge over us has told us that we have to eat the king's food that has been offered to idols. Now, let me explain. These 4 boys, along with many other boys, were taken prisoner back to a land called Babylon. These boys were from Israel, but Babylon came and attacked Israel, and they were able to defeat Israel. And so Babylon was able to take people prisoners and back to their own land. And so Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel all were taken prisoners back to the land of Babylon. And because they were handsome and they were smart and maybe even really strong, they were chosen to go and prepare for the king's service. And the Bible tells us that it was going to take them 3 years of training in order to get ready to be in the king's service. And at the end of the 3 years then, the king would go and would look at all the prisoners, and he would decide who was the best prepared to work in his service or in his kingdom. And part of their training was they had to be well fed, because the king only wanted people who were strong and who were healthy to work for him. He didn't want people that were weak and sickly looking. No, he wanted only the best. And this was the problem. You see, the king was giving them food that had been offered to the idol. You see, the people of Babylon, they did not worship the one true God that we're told about in the Bible, the God who created the heaven and the earth. No, they worshiped another God. Many times they worshiped just a piece of wood or a piece of stone or maybe metal that had been shaped into some kind of either a human form, or sometimes it was even an animal form. And they thought that was the God who needed to be worshiped and who was important to be bowed down and respected. And so many people would bring food in order to give as a gift to these idols. But a piece of wood, a piece of stone, it can't eat that food. And so the king would then take that food, and maybe he would eat some, and he would give some to those who were training for his service. But Daniel said, we will not eat of that food because it's been offered to an idol, and that would be disobeying our God. In fact, if we eat of this food, it would sort of be like worshiping that idol. And God does not want us to do that. So he said, no, I will not eat of that food. But some of the other boys said, but Daniel, if we don't eat of this food, the king might get angry with us, and he might even kill us. Daniel said, I know that is very true, but I still believe that God does not want us to eat of that food. Well, I'm sure Daniel and his 3 friends prayed to God and said, God, please help us. We don't know what to do. We want to obey you. And God heard their prayer, and he helped them. In fact, he helped Daniel have courage to go to the man that was in charge and talk with him about it. And when the man that was in charge came to give them food, Daniel told the man, we cannot eat of this food because it's been offered to the idols. And the man said, you've got to eat this food. It's my job to take care of you. And if you don't eat and you're not strong and healthy, then I will be in trouble. The king will be angry with me. I may even get killed. And Daniel said, yes, I know that, sir, but please, I would like to offer you that we would get a test. Could we, the 4 of us boys, just have vegetables and water, no food that has been offered to the idols? Could you just give us those things for 10 days? Just 10 days. And then you look and see. If we are strong and healthy, then allow us to continue eating that. Well, the man in charge, he listened to what they said and he thought about it. They're going to be training for 3 years. 10 days, that's not that long. He said, okay, I'll do that. And so for the next 10 days, Daniel and his friends did not eat of the food that had been offered to idols, and instead they only ate vegetables and water. And at the end of 10 days, the man who was in charge of them came and he looked at them. And I'm sure he really looked at them because he wanted to make sure what they were like. And he was surprised. He didn't see them to be weak and sickly and having no energy. Instead, he saw that they were strong and healthy. And so he agreed, and he let Daniel and his 3 friends eat only vegetables and water and not touch any of the food that had been offered to the idols. And so Daniel was very, very happy about that. Well, Daniel and his three friends, they worked hard. They studied hard for the next 3 years. And because they obeyed God, God rewarded them. And he helped them to do well in their studies. In fact, the Bible tells us that God even gave Daniel a special ability in order to know what people's dreams meant. And God was able to use this in order to help Daniel to serve him in the kingdom. Well, at the end of 3 years, it was time for the boys to go before the king. And when they went in front of the king saw that they were strong and healthy. And he saw that they were smarter than any of the other boys that were prisoners. He was even smarter maybe than some of the people that already worked for him. And he was very impressed with these boys. And so he said, I want all of you to work for me. And he gave them a very important job in the kingdom. And whatever jobs they did, they tried very hard to do their very best in order to please God. Now, do you think it was very easy for Daniel and his three friends to obey God? I don't think so. You see, Daniel and his friends were in a different country. And I'm sure there would be times when they might be thinking kind of like our puppets. No one's watching them. Their parents aren't here. Their teachers aren't here. Nobody is watching them. No one would know what they needed to do in order to please God. But Daniel and his three friends said, we know and we want to obey and follow what God's rules are. And so they were very determined that they were going to obey God, even if no one was watching. And I forgot to tell you something. I want to go back to this picture here. You know, Daniel and his three friends said, we are not going to eat of the king's food that has been offered to the idols. But there were a lot of other boys from Israel. Do you see these boys here? They're still from Israel. But what are they doing? They're still eating of the king's food, the one that had been offered to the idols. And you know, it wasn't easy for Daniel and his friends to stick up and say, hey, we are going to obey God no matter what. Because they saw many other boys not obeying God. And sometimes that's hard, isn't it? When you want to obey and yet you see other people not obeying. Sometimes we say, well, I can disobey because they're disobeying. Daniel could have said that, couldn't he? But he didn't. He said, no, God wants me to obey. And so that was very important. Well, the Bible tells us that Daniel made up his mind that he was going to obey what God wanted him to do. And so did his three friends. What about you? Do you obey? Do you obey only when you're afraid someone might see you, someone might be watching, or you might get in trouble if you don't obey? Or do you say, no, obeying God is important, and I want to please God, so I'm going to obey, even if no one sees me? What about if other people aren't obeying? Do you obey even then? I know it's not easy, but that's what God wants us to do. Obeying God is very, very important. And we should want to be like Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and obey even when no one else is obeying and even when no one else is watching. All right, let's see how well you were listening today. I've got a few review questions for you, okay? So listen up, see if you can get the right answers, and let me know. Text in on the internet and let me know how you're doing with your questions, all right? All right, question number 1. Why were Daniel and his friends in Babylon? Can you remember? Yes. Yeah, they had been taken as prisoners, and so now they're in this other country called Babylon. Good. All right, second question. What problem did Daniel and his friends have in our lesson today? Yeah, that's right. They were trying to be forced to eat food that had been offered to idols. Very good. Number 3, why did they not want to eat the king's food? I know this is a kind of a hard one. I hope you got it. Yeah, they didn't want to eat that food because it had been offered to idols, and God did not want them to do that. And they said that would be like worshiping the idols, and that would be sin. So they said, no, we can't do that. Next question. What test did Daniel ask the man in charge to do? Yeah, to eat only vegetables and water for how many days? 10 days, that's right. All right, at the end of 10 days, who was stronger and healthier? Were Daniel and his friends, or do you think those that ate the king's meats? Yeah, Daniel and his friends were stronger, good, and healthier. All right, next question. Because they obeyed God, what did God do for them? God likes it when we obey, and he wants us to obey. And you're right, he helped Daniel and his 3 friends. He helped them to do well in their studies, and he helped to make them stronger and healthier, and he helped them even to get jobs, didn't he? Did the king choose Daniel and his friends to work for him? Yes, he did, didn't he? And that was because Daniel and his friends obeyed. That's what our lessons have been about for the last weeks, and it's what our lesson is about today. We need to remember that God thinks it's very important for us to obey. He wants us to obey, even when those around us are not obeying, and even when no one else is watching. I hope you'll remember that this week, that it's important for you to obey, and you will make God happy if you do.
Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord. I will dwell in the house of the Lord. Yes, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.